Today, we're going to talk about a scenario that you've probably run into. Now, you've been asked to integrate with some API. This could be within your organization. This could be some third-party API. So you look around, you find some documentation, you see a particular endpoint that you can call, and this is the response that you're going to get. So, okay, I think I can make this happen. I'm going to go ahead and create a project or create a type in my project to correspond with that response. And I'll make the call and deserialize it into that type. And then boom, something blows up. What just happened? Why didn't this work? That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about a few things. And this really comes from a question that I got of somebody trying to consume a third-party API, and they had a couple issues. So we'll start off by creating a project. We'll talk about mocking out that response to kind of mimic this service that this individual was trying to call. From there, we'll be able to create a type that corresponds with that response so that we can deserialize that JSON into a type. We'll take a look at that by creating a test to see if, okay, is the problem with the deserialization or maybe kind of the HTTP call using some type of client. Once we get that working, we'll take a look at maybe an HTTP call using the REST client in Spring Boot. And there was a particular error that was coming up that this individual was fighting, and we'll see that error in action and then how we can kind of solve for that. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. This is something I think we all do in almost every single application we work on today, and we'll learn a few things along the way. I don't really have a great title or description for this video, but again, I think this is something we're used to all working on. So we should learn a few things. Stick around and see if you learned something in this video. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating a new project. We're going to head over to start.spring.io. I'm going to choose Java, Maven, the latest version of Spring Boot. I'm going to say this is dev.danvega. We're going to call this the Polygon. Again, this is one of the services this individual was working with, Polygon.io. Has some like market data, stock ticker, trends, results, things like that. And again, this will work for kind of any scenario that you're working with. So I'm going to use JDK23. I'm going to come in here and choose web. That's really all I need. I'm building a web endpoint to kind of mock the response. And then within that, I'll use the REST client to call this API in, say, a command line runner just to kind of test it out. But we'll also write a test for this too. So really all I need is the web to kind of walk through this. That transitively brings in JSON support. So JSON is the library underneath the hood that is used for serializing and deserializing objects in Java. So if you're not using Spring and you want to do something similar to this, you can use JSON to kind of mimic this. Not to really mimic, but to actually do this. Okay, so I think we have all we need. What I'll do is go ahead and generate this. This is going to download a zip file. From there, you can open this up in your favorite IDE or text editor. For me, that's going to be IntelliJ. With that, I think we have everything we need. So let's write some code. All right, so we are going to come in here. I'm going to rename this to application. Let's go ahead and do that as well. And the first thing I'm going to do is come in here and create a new REST controller. I'm going to call this the Polygon controller. Again, we're going to kind of mimic what is going on in this third-party API that this individual is trying to communicate with. So let's say this is a request mapping, and we'll just say to /API/Polygon. I think that's how you spell it. From there, what are we going to do? We're going to create a get mapping. And this is going to be to just the kind of root there, the root endpoint. And we're just going to return a string. We're going to say get JSON. And this is going to be the response that the individual kind of sent me in the email. So it's going to look something like this. And now we have something we can work with, right? So this is kind of the JSON response we're getting. And we need to align this up with a type in our system. So we have these fields, then we have this list of results. So I would say each of these is a result. And then we have a couple more fields down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a record. So first tip, kind of making sure that we're using these immutable types here. Because this really helps out in our system. It has a lot of advantages. So we're going to use a record to kind of model this type in the system. So to do that, I'm going to create a new Java class. I'm going to call this grouped by, or I'm sorry, grouped daily, because this is the class that the individual kind of sent me that they were working with. So I'm going to stick with that. So this is going to be a record. I'm going to pull this over here so that we can kind of look at this together. And then we have a way to kind of look at this and start modeling this out. So the first thing I'm going to do is say Boolean adjusted, because that's going to be true or false. We're going to say integer query count. Again, I'm just kind of lining these up with what is there. I'll say I'm going to have a list of something called a result. We'll call this results. Now we will need to create another record for that in a second. I'm going to say I have an integer of result count, a string of status, and then we may have something in here. Do I have a request ID in here? No, but I believe this person had a request ID in there just in case one was coming back. I don't have one in the JSON that I have, so maybe I'll just leave that out for now. So now I need a record for results. I could easily create a separate file for this, but I can also go ahead and just kind of create one inline. So I'll say record result. And we need to create some components in here. Now, here's where kind of the first question came in, because when they were doing this and they were calling this, they thought maybe this was the issue. So we look over here, we see the results have things like T, C, H, L, N, and those aren't very, very descriptive, right? Like you could come in here and say string T, double C, double H, like those work, right? But it's not very descriptive. And so we want to kind of get away from that. So what we want to do is we want to create some variable names that make sense. So in this case, it's a ticker. And this is the ticker symbol, right? Now, this isn't going to line up because what's coming back in the result is capital T there. Now, the way that we can do this is we can instruct the Jackson deserialization to say like, okay, this is the name of the variable, but when you're looking at the result, the response, here's what you're going to be looking for. And you can do that using the JSON property annotation. And so the JSON property annotation can be used to define a non-static method as a setter or a getter for a logical property accessor, depending on its signature. So this is the value, indicates the name of the field or the derived name of the accessor method, whether it was a setter or a getter. So you can say JSON property A, public int ABC, right? So that means in our case, we can say JSON property T and assign that to string ticker, right? So, oops, we don't need this. And I'm going to go ahead and copy, let's just copy and paste this because we don't want to watch me type all this. So let's do something like this. And now we've aligned up with this, right? So ticker, C for close, high, low, number of trades, open, timestamp, volume, and VW, volume weighted average price. So again, I don't know any of this stuff, but that kind of makes sense. All right, so now we have this record, this group daily record and this result record that aligns with the JSON that we're getting back. So we have something that we can work with. Now what we want to do is we want to first see like, okay, if I get that response, can we deserialize it into that grouped daily object? And you can go ahead and like write some like real code to do that, or we could start with a test to make that happen. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, let's create a new Java class. We're going to call this grouped daily test. And this is a class. And the first thing that we need is an instance of the object mapper. So if you're not familiar, the object mapper is from JSON, and this is what's used to read in a value and kind of map it over to something else. So we're going to read in a response and map it to that grouped daily type. So we're going to say object mapper, we'll call this object mapper, and we're just going to create a new instance of this. You notice we're not using any Spring annotations. We don't need any external dependencies. I don't want to kind of bring in all of Spring once this gets this application gets much bigger. I don't want to have to do that. So I'm just creating a pure unit test here. We're going to create an instance of that object mapper, and then we can be off and running. So I'm going to create a new test. We're going to say void should parse JSON into grouped daily. That's kind of our test name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start with a given. So what we have for a test, kind of knowing what the response is going to be. So I'm going to paste that in here. Same JSON as before. Given the JSON response looks like this. And then when we do something, so what are we going to do? In our case, we're going to try and deserialize that. We're going to say grouped daily. We'll call this grouped daily is equal to object mapper dot read value. So what are we reading? We're reading that JSON, and we want to map it over to the grouped daily class. So once we do that, then, then now we can start to make some assertions. So I'm going to paste all these assertions in because that'll get kind of boring going through all this. But here are some assertions that we can kind of make. So I want to make sure query count is not in there. Let's see. So let's go back here and query count. Let's make sure we spell that correctly. And then results count. Let's make sure we have that correctly. And then we do need a request ID because I have it in the test. So I think we'll just put in request ID. Okay. So those are our tests. We're basically making sure that it's not null and that these are true. So I make sure this is true, make sure this equals exactly what it is. Because again, we have the exact data right up here. But all we're doing here is we're trying to make sure that the deserialization into our object is not the first problem. Once we know that we can take the response that we're expecting and turn it into an object, the first part of our problem solving is done, right? Next, we can kind of worry about like the communication via some HTTP client. So let's do this first. Let's run this test and see if this passes. And it does. So good. So the first part of this problem is solved. All right. So now the second part of this problem is they were calling this via an HTTP client using the REST client. And I was getting this error. I can't figure out why this error is happening. And they thought maybe it was the stuff that we've just done. Like, did I have the object deserialization working correctly? We've taken that problem kind of out of the equation, right? We know that that's working now. So let's figure out why we can't make a REST client call. Let's start with that. Let's use create a REST client, call our local service that is running on 8080, and see if there's an error. There is going to be, that's okay. I want to take a look at that error and see if we can figure out why that error is happening. Okay, to do this, I'm going to open up application. And what we're going to do in here is really just create a command line runner. So when the application starts up, go ahead and make a call to the localhost 8080. So I'm going to create a new bean. This is going to be a command line runner, and this is going to return args. And that is the start. Now what I need is a REST client. And to get a REST client, I can use the REST client.builder. We'll call this builder. And now in here, I can say, all right, give me a client using the builder. And I'm going to set a base URL. And that base URL in this case is just going to be localhost 8080. And that looks good. Let's go ahead and build that. And that will return our client. So now what I can do is use that client, and I can say client.get, client, let's spell this right, Dan, client.get, the URI, so localhost 8080 is the base URL, but what we're calling is API/polygon, and I think we're just going to call that. And what we want to do is we just want to retrieve it, and we want to turn that into an entity. And remember, that entity is the grouped daily class. So let's see what we get back from that. We'll call that entity. And all I want to do is print that out and see if we can get that going. So I am going to go back here, and let's go ahead and run this application. And we see that we get an error. And if we go in here, it says, could not extract response. No suitable HTTP message converter found for response type and content type text plain. So what we're trying to do is we're calling some endpoint, in this case, the Polygon controller in here, /API/Polygon. And we're asking for some response, and we're trying to deserialize that into an object. What this error is telling us is that I can't extract a response from that. I don't have an HTTP message converter. I can't convert what you're giving me for the type and the content type text plain. And that should be the key there sticking out. That is telling us, hey, I can't do anything with that. I am trying to take your text and deserialize that into an object. But we know that what we've been working with is really JSON, right? Like we need JSON. We're trying to deserialize JSON. So there is a simple fix to this. And what we want to do here when we build this client out is we want to say that we are going to accept a certain type of response, right? And the way that we can do that is we can say, I'm going to set a default header here. And I could put in some string, but I can also use HTTP headers. So HTTP headers dot accept. So I'm saying that the accept header and the value for the accept header is going to be media type dot application slash JSON, and that will now say, okay, whoops, did I want value? Yes. And that will say, okay, when we ask the API for some response, I want that to be in JSON format. So now let's go ahead and try and run this again. And boom, you see we now have an okay response, and then we've turned that JSON into this actual grouped daily type. So if we wanted to, we can come down here and say, S out. We can say entity.getBody, and then that would be the actual group daily record. So you see that we can say like, what is the status? And then we can print that out if we wanted to. So now we actually have a type in our system that we're working with, and you can see the status down there is okay. So for me, that is a lot of the kind of things that we're doing when we're working with APIs, right? One, we got to take a look at the response, and can we map that into an object in our system? We saw that by creating a record that lines up with it. We also saw being able to use the @JSON property annotation so that we can use real field names in our record and still kind of line up with the JSON response, like the T and the C and the H and etc. So that was kind of the first part. And then being able to write a test to say, here's the expected contract. Here's the JSON that I expect to get back. Can we deserialize that into an object? Once we do that, half the battle is over, right? We know that that part of the equation is solved for. The next part of the equation is we are using some type of mechanism to call out to some other service, whether it's within our organization or some other third-party API. And in this case, that's the REST client. And the REST client was throwing an error because we weren't asking for a specific media type. We want to work with JSON. We need to be specific with that. The REST client makes this very easy to do when we're building an instance of the client by setting a default header saying, hey, I always expect JSON here. If you're working with XML or some other format, you can set that accept header as well. And then once we did that, we were easily able to call that API using the REST client. And then I love the REST client because it's so easy to turn that into a type. By using that toEntity method, we just said, when you get the response, turn that into this grouped daily class, and it automatically did that conversion for us. So things worked out good. So hey, another great question, this time via email. I really appreciate that question. I thought this was a lot of fun to work with. And again, just something that we are all kind of dealing with on a day-to-day basis when working with APIs. So friends, if you learned something new today, I know I did. I had some fun doing this. If you learned something new, do me a big favor. Leave me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. And as always, happy coding.